When Margaret Chen handed me that broom and said, "The kitchen's dirty, dear. Better get started," I looked at the diamond ring on her finger that cost more than most people make in a year. She had no idea she was ordering a woman worth $8 million to scrub her floors. My name is Dorothy Patterson. I'm 72 years old, and that humiliating moment was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Because sometimes you need to dress poor to see people's true colors, especially when your son is about to marry into their family. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe, because what happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about wealth and character. Let me take you back 3 weeks before that moment. My son Michael had just gotten engaged to Jessica Chen, a beautiful young woman he'd met at his law firm. He was 35, successful, and this was his first serious relationship in years. I was thrilled for him. But there was something in Jessica's voice when she talked about money, about status, about the right kind of people that made my stomach twist. It reminded me too much of my own past, of people who judged me when I had nothing. You see, I wasn't always wealthy. My husband George and I built our fortune from absolutely nothing. We started with a small dry cleaning business in 1975, worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. We lived in a tiny apartment above the shop, ate rice and beans most nights, and saved every penny. People looked down on us. The Chinese immigrants working with their hands, smelling like cleaning chemicals. I remember women in fur coats dropping off their clothes and never making eye contact with me, as if I was invisible. George died 8 years ago, but not before we'd built that single dry cleaner into a chain of 43 locations across 3 states. We invested wisely, bought real estate when nobody wanted it, and built something real. Michael grew up watching us work, understanding the value of every dollar, or at least I thought he did. But now, listening to Jessica talk about her family's expectations and their position in society, I wasn't so sure he remembered where he came from. Jessica's family was old money. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. Her mother came from textile manufacturing wealth. They lived in a mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood, belonged to the country club, attended charity galas. Jessica had grown up with maids, drivers, private schools. She'd never scrubbed a floor in her life, never worried about a bill, never known what it meant to be invisible to people who thought they were better than you. Michael invited me to dinner at their house to meet Jessica's parents for the first time. I was preparing my best dress, my pearl necklace, planning to be the polished, successful businesswoman I'd become. But then Jessica called me 2 days before. "Dorothy," she said. Not Mrs. Patterson, just Dorothy, like I was a friend her own age. I should mention that my parents are very particular about appearances. They're very traditional about social standing and, well, they believe a person's worth shows in how they present themselves. I held the phone tighter. "What exactly are you trying to say, Jessica?" There was a pause. "I just mean that first impressions matter so much to them. They judge people very quickly based on, external things. Michael mentioned you still live in your old house, that you drive an older car, that you're not really into designer brands or anything like that. I'm just worried they might not understand your choices." Something cold settled in my chest. "You're worried they'll think I'm poor." Another pause. "I didn't say that. I'm just saying they notice these things. Maybe you could, I don't know, mention your business success early in the conversation? Or talk about your investments? Just so they know Michael didn't come from humble circumstances." She actually said that. Humble circumstances. As if poverty was something shameful, something to hide. I thanked her for the advice and hung up. Then I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where George and I used to count our earnings at the end of each day, and I made a decision. I was going to that dinner, all right, but not as the successful businesswoman I'd become. I was going as the woman I used to be, the immigrant dry cleaner who made rich people uncomfortable. I wanted to see exactly who these people were when they thought they were better than me. I went to the thrift store the next day. I found a faded blue cardigan with a small stain on the sleeve, a plain gray skirt that hung a little loose, and sensible shoes that looked worn. I put my expensive pearl necklace back in its box and found an old costume jewelry piece instead. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw Dorothy from 1975, the woman who used to ride the bus to work because we couldn't afford a second car. Perfect. The day of the dinner, I drove my old 2008 Honda Civic instead of the Mercedes I usually drove. I'd kept that Honda because it reminded me of hard times, of staying humble. Now it was going to serve a different purpose. When I pulled up to the Chen mansion, and it was a mansion with actual columns and a circular driveway, I saw Jessica's face fall through the window. She came rushing out before I even reached the door. "Dorothy, I thought you were going to... is that what you're wearing?" She looked genuinely panicked. I smiled sweetly. "What's wrong with it? It's clean and comfortable." She glanced back at the house. "It's just that my parents are expecting... You know what? Never mind. Just please don't mention anything about dry cleaning or working with your hands or anything like that. They're very sensitive about class issues. Class issues. As if honest work was something to be ashamed of. "I'll do my best," I told her. But I could see she didn't believe me. Michael appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable in an expensive suit I knew Jessica had picked out. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the question in his voice, the confusion about why I looked so different. But he didn't say anything else. He'd learned not to question his fiancée in public. We walked inside, and I had to admit, it was impressive. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, artwork that was probably worth more than some houses. A maid, an actual maid in a uniform, took my worn cardigan, handling it like it might contaminate the other coats in the closet. Jessica's younger sister Emma walked past, took one look at me, and I saw her whisper something to her brother James. They both smirked. Margaret and Richard Chen were waiting in the living room, drinks already in hand. Margaret was wearing a designer dress I recognized from a magazine spread, and Richard had the kind of watch you could trade for a luxury car. They stood up when we entered, their smiles polite and cold. "You must be Dorothy," Margaret said, extending her hand but not actually touching mine firmly. Just the fingertips, like she was afraid to commit to a real handshake. "Thank you for having me," I said, letting my voice carry a slight nervous tremor. I wanted them to think I was intimidated, out of my depth. Margaret's smile widened slightly. She'd heard exactly what she expected to hear. "Please sit down. Jessica has told us so much about you." Her eyes traveled over my outfit, the worn shoes, the cheap jewelry, and I saw something flash in them. Satisfaction, maybe, or confirmation of something she'd already assumed. Richard offered me a drink. "We have an excellent Bordeaux 1982. Or if you prefer something simpler, we have beer in the kitchen." Something simpler? As if I wouldn't know good wine from bad, wouldn't understand what a 1982 Bordeaux meant. "Water would be lovely," I said, making my voice small. "I don't really drink wine. It goes right to my head." I saw Jessica close her eyes briefly, embarrassed. Michael looked confused, because he knew I had an excellent wine collection at home. Margaret rang a small bell, and the maid appeared instantly. "Bring Mrs. Patterson some water, please. Tap is fine." Tap is fine. She didn't even ask if I wanted bottled or sparkling. Emma, sitting across from me, was texting someone and barely hiding her smile. I knew exactly what kind of message she was sending. "OMG, you should see Michael's mom." The whole family had already decided who I was before I'd said more than 10 words. Dinner was served in a formal dining room with a table that could seat 20. They sat me between Jessica's brother James and her grandfather, who was 90 and mostly deaf. It wasn't the place of honor. That was clearly reserved for people they actually respected. The meal was elaborate. Courses I couldn't name, served on china so delicate I was afraid to use the fork too firmly. Margaret watched every move I made, and I made sure to use the wrong fork once, to seem unsure about which wine glass was mine. "So, Dorothy," Richard began, cutting into his beef with precision, "Jessica mentioned you're in the service industry?" Service industry. Such a careful way to avoid saying what he really thought. "I own dry cleaners," I said simply. "Started with one, now I have a few." I deliberately understated it, made it sound small and insignificant. "How many is a few?" he pressed. "Oh, enough to keep me busy. 11 or 12, I think." I actually had 43, but I watched his face relax at the smaller number, as if 12 made me less successful, more manageable. Margaret leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. And you do the actual cleaning yourself? There was something in her tone, something that made the question sound like an accusation. Used to, I said. These days I mostly manage things, but I still know how to run every machine, remove every kind of stain. You learn a lot about people from their clothes, what they spill, what they try to hide. I saw her straighten slightly, as if I'd touched a nerve. How quaint, Emma said, not looking up from her phone. Like, do you have to smell all those dirty clothes? Jessica turned red. Emma, that's rude. But Emma just shrugged. I'm just asking. I mean, it must be so different from what we're used to. We've never really known anyone who does that kind of work. As if I was some exotic creature from a world they'd only seen on television. I smiled sweetly at her. It's honest work. Someone has to do it, and I'm proud of what I built. James snorted into his wine glass. Built. That's generous. I mean, it's not like you're building skyscrapers or curing diseases. You're cleaning clothes. The contempt in his voice was so casual, so comfortable, as if he'd never considered that the person cleaning his clothes might be a human being with feelings, with a story, with worth beyond their service to him. Michael finally spoke up. Mom built a successful business from nothing. That takes intelligence and hard work. But his voice was quiet, almost apologetic, as if he was embarrassed to defend me too strongly. Margaret patted his hand. Of course, dear. We're not criticizing. We just move in different circles, that's all. Different social spheres. Code for, we're better than you. The evening continued in the same vein. Every question was designed to emphasize the gap between us. Every comment a subtle put-down, wrapped in politeness. When I mentioned I still lived in my original house, a modest 3-bedroom in a working-class neighborhood, Margaret actually gasped. You mean you haven't moved? Even after your business grew? I shook my head. It's home. It has memories. She exchanged a look with Richard. How sentimental. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee, Margaret pulled me aside. Jessica and Michael were talking with Richard about the wedding plans, and the younger siblings had disappeared. Dorothy, Margaret said, her voice low and confidential. I want to be direct with you. Jessica is marrying into significant wealth and social standing on our side. We have expectations for family members, certain standards they need to maintain. I'm sure you understand. I played dumb. Standards? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Appearances matter in our world. The way people dress, the way they speak, the places they're seen. Michael will need to maintain a certain image, and naturally that extends to his family. We wouldn't want anything to embarrass him professionally or socially. She was telling me, as politely as possible, that I was an embarrassment, that I needed to either change or stay hidden. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked, keeping my voice uncertain, timid. Margaret touched my arm lightly, like a queen bestowing favor on a peasant. Perhaps we could help you. A wardrobe consultant, maybe some etiquette coaching. There are people who specialize in this sort of thing, helping people transition into higher social circles. We'd be happy to cover the cost, of course. Consider it a gift, mother-in-law to mother-in-law. I let silence stretch between us. Let her think I was overwhelmed, maybe even grateful. That's very kind, I finally said, but I'm comfortable as I am. Her smile froze. Dorothy, I don't think you understand what I'm offering. This is an opportunity for you to improve your situation, to become someone Michael can be proud to introduce at his firm's events, at country club functions. Don't you want that for him? Before I could answer, the maid appeared. The same woman who'd taken my cardigan, who'd been serving us all evening with invisible efficiency. Excuse me, Mrs. Chen, she said quietly. The kitchen needs attention before I leave. Should I stay late? Margaret waved her hand dismissively. No, you can go. Dorothy here can handle it. She's used to this kind of work, aren't you, dear? She turned to me with a bright smile. Would you mind terribly? It's just loading the dishwasher and wiping down the counters. Nothing complicated. And that's when she handed me the broom. That's when she said those words that would change everything. The kitchen's dirty, dear. Better get started. She actually expected me to clean her kitchen. to be the help, because that's all I was to her. Someone whose only value was service. Someone beneath her. Someone who should be grateful for the opportunity to scrub floors in her mansion. I took the broom, and I saw the satisfaction in her eyes. The confirmation of everything she'd assumed about me from the moment I walked in wearing my thrift store clothes. I looked at that broom in my hands, felt its worn wooden handle, and something shifted inside me. This wasn't about pride anymore, or about teaching anyone a lesson. This was about something deeper, about the way people like Margaret Chen saw people like the woman I used to be, the woman millions of Americans still were. People who worked with their hands, who served others, who were invisible until someone needed their labor. In that moment, holding that broom, I made a decision that would expose everything. What would you have done in my position? Would you have walked out, or would you have done what I did next? Keep watching, because I was about to teach the Chen family a lesson they'd never forget. I took that broom and walked toward the kitchen, but I didn't start cleaning. Instead, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to my lawyer, David Morrison. Execute plan immediately. Chen family. All documentation ready. Then I set the broom against the wall and walked back into that living room where Margaret was already telling Jessica how helpful I'd been, how I knew my place. The look on my face must have been different, because Michael actually stood up, sensing something had shifted. "Margaret," I said, my voice no longer small or uncertain, "I need to tell you something." She looked at me with that same condescending smile. "Of course, dear. Did you need cleaning supplies? The maid usually keeps them under the sink." I shook my head. "I don't need cleaning supplies. I need you to understand something about the woman you just handed a broom to. My name is Dorothy Patterson, and I'm worth $8 million. The silence that fell over that room was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Margaret's smile froze on her face. Richard actually choked on his brandy. Emma looked up from her phone for the first time all evening, her mouth hanging open. Jessica had gone completely pale. "What?" Margaret finally managed to say. "That's impossible. You own dry cleaners." "I own 43 dry cleaning locations across 3 states, I said calmly. "I also own the commercial real estate they're on, plus 17 other investment properties. My late husband George and I built an empire from a single shop we bought with borrowed money 50 years ago. We worked 16-hour days, lived on nothing, and invested every penny we earned. When George died, he left me a fortune that would make most people's heads spin. So yes, Margaret, I own dry cleaners, and I'm wealthier than your entire family combined." Richard stood up, his face red. "This is absurd. If you're so wealthy, why did you come here dressed like that?" He gestured at my thrift store outfit with disgust. I smiled for the first time that evening, and it wasn't a kind smile. "Because I wanted to see who you really were. Jessica called me 2 days ago and told me to hide my humble circumstances from you. She was embarrassed that I still live in my old house, that I don't flaunt my money. So I decided to test you. I wanted to see how you treated someone you thought was beneath you. And you failed spectacularly," I continued. "Every single one of you showed me exactly who you are. The way you assigned me a seat at the end of the table. The way you asked if I wanted something simpler than your expensive wine. The way Emma called my life's work quaint, and James mocked the idea of building a business. And then you, Margaret, you actually handed me a broom and told me to clean your kitchen because I was used to that kind of work." Margaret's hand flew to her throat, touching those expensive pearls. "I didn't mean, I was just trying to be efficient. The maid had to leave and someone needed to—" She trailed off, realizing how it sounded. "You meant exactly what you did," I said. "You saw someone you thought was poor, and you treated them like a servant. You saw someone you thought was beneath you, and you acted like they should be grateful for your scraps of kindness." Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her face. "Mrs. Patterson, Dorothy, please, I didn't know you were going to do this. I was just trying to prepare you for my parents. They're particular about appearances, and I thought—" I turned to her, and my voice was harder than I'd ever used with her before. "You thought I should hide who I was. You thought honest work was something to be ashamed of. You were embarrassed by me before you even knew me, Jessica. Not because of who I am, but because of what you thought I represented. Michael finally found his voice. Mom, why didn't you tell me you were planning this? His face was torn between shock and something that might have been admiration. Because I needed to see the truth, son. I needed to see how the family you're marrying into treats people they think are inferior to them. I needed you to see it too. He looked at Jessica, then at her parents, and I saw the realization dawning on him. This wasn't just about me. This was about values, about character, about the kind of people he was joining his life with. Richard had recovered some of his composure. Even if what you're saying is true, you deceived us. You came into our home under false pretenses. That's dishonest. I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Dishonest? I wore modest clothes and let you assume things about me. You're the ones who decided that modest clothes meant I was worthless. You're the ones who treated me like dirt based on nothing but appearances. I just held up a mirror, Richard. Don't blame me because you don't like what you see. I know what you're thinking right now. Was I too harsh? Should I have just walked away? Leave me a comment telling me what you would have done. Because this is where things get even more complicated. The front door opened, and David Morrison walked in. My lawyer for 20 years. He was carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of suit that screamed, "Expensive attorney." Margaret looked confused. Who is this? How did you get in? David smiled professionally. I have documentation that Mrs. Patterson asked me to deliver. I let myself in through the side entrance. The maid was kind enough to show me in before she left. He turned to me. Everything is in order, Dorothy. David opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. This is the deed to 2847 Laurel Canyon Road. Perhaps you know it, Mr. Chen? It's the building where your main dealership is located. Richard's face went white. That building is owned by Laurel Properties LLC. I lease from them. David nodded. Laurel Properties LLC is wholly owned by Dorothy Patterson, has been for 12 years. You've been paying rent to the woman you just handed a broom to. The revelation hit like a bomb. Margaret actually sat down heavily, her legs giving out. Emma dropped her phone. James made a strangled sound. Jessica was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. There's more, David continued, clearly enjoying himself. Mrs. Patterson also owns the strip mall where your wife's boutique is located, Margaret, and the office building where James works, and the condo complex where Emma lives. You're not just insulting a woman who's wealthier than you. You're insulting your landlord. I let that sink in for a moment, watched the horror dawn on their faces as they realized the power dynamic they'd assumed was completely inverted. I don't tell people about my wealth because I don't need to, I said quietly. I've never needed expensive clothes or fancy jewelry or a mansion to know my worth. I know what I built. I know what I survived. I know what I earned. But you assumed that because I didn't display my wealth the way you do, I must not have any. Michael was staring at me with new eyes. Mom, I knew you were successful, but I had no idea it was this much. Why didn't you ever tell me the exact numbers? I turned to him. Because I wanted you to value work, not money. I wanted you to understand that wealth is what you build, not what you show off. Your father and I lived modestly even after we became wealthy because we never forgot where we came from. We never forgot what it felt like to be invisible to people who thought they were better than us. And that's the real issue here, I continued, looking at each member of the Chen family in turn. It's not about the money. It's about how you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you. That maid who let David in? You didn't even ask her name all evening, Margaret. You rang a bell for her like she was a dog. The way you treated me when you thought I was poor is the way you treat everyone you think is beneath you. And that tells me everything I need to know about your character. Jessica stood up, her voice shaking. What does this mean? For us? For Michael and me? I looked at my son, and I saw him looking at his fiancée with new uncertainty in his eyes. That's not for me to decide, Jessica. That's for Michael to decide. He needs to figure out if he can build a life with someone who's embarrassed by honest work. If he can join a family that measures worth in dollars and judges people by their clothes. If he wants to raise children who think the way you all think. Margaret had found her voice again, and it was sharp with anger. You had no right to come into our home and trick us like this. You deliberately made us look bad. I picked up my cheap purse from where I'd set it down hours ago. I didn't make you look bad, Margaret. I gave you an opportunity to show who you really are, and you took it. Every word you said, every assumption you made, every condescending smile, those were your choices. I just watched and took notes. Your son, Richard said, his voice cold, works at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. He's going places. This kind of drama, this public humiliation of our family, it could damage his reputation. Have you thought about that? I met his eyes. Are you threatening my son's career, Richard? Because that would be a very stupid thing to do. I have lawyers who would love to explore the concept of retaliation, and I have enough money to keep them busy for years. The threat landed. Richard took a step back. I wasn't threatening. I was just pointing out the social implications. But his voice had lost its confidence. He'd realized something crucial. He couldn't intimidate me with social standing or veiled threats. I had more money, more lawyers, and absolutely nothing to lose. He'd picked a fight with someone who'd survived real poverty, real struggle, real discrimination. His country club power plays were nothing compared to that. Emma spoke up for the first time since the revelation, her voice small. So when I said that thing about smelling dirty clothes, you could have destroyed me and you just let me say it? I looked at the young woman who'd been so casually cruel earlier. I wanted you to show me who you were without any filter. Congratulations, Emma. You did exactly that. She burst into tears, finally understanding that her words had consequences, that the person she'd mocked had the power to make her life very difficult. Jessica's younger brother James had been quiet, but now he stood up, his face red with embarrassment and anger. This is entrapment or something. You can't just go around testing people like this. It's manipulative. I almost laughed. Manipulative? I wore inexpensive clothes and let you draw your own conclusions. You're the one who decided that made me worthless. You're the one who mocked me for building a business. You're the one who said I wasn't building skyscrapers or curing diseases. That was all you, James. I just gave you enough rope. David closed his briefcase with a decisive snap. Mrs. Patterson, do you want me to proceed with the other documents? I shook my head. Not yet. I want to give everyone here a chance to think about what happened tonight. To really think about how they treated someone they thought couldn't fight back. I turned to Michael. Son, I'm going home now. You need to decide what kind of family you want to be part of, what kind of values you want to build your life on. I'll support whatever you choose, but I won't pretend to like it. Michael looked torn between his mother and his fiancée. Jessica was clinging to his arm, crying openly now. Michael, please, we can fix this. We can apologize. We can make this right. But even she didn't sound convinced. How do you apologize for revealing your true character? How do you take back the assumptions and judgments that came so naturally? Margaret tried one more time. Dorothy, if we could just sit down and talk about this rationally. Rationally? I turned to her. Like when you rationally decided I should clean your kitchen. Like when you rationally offered to get me etiquette coaching so I wouldn't embarrass your daughter. There's nothing to talk about, Margaret. You showed me exactly who you are. The question now is whether my son can live with being married to someone raised by people like you. The words were harsh, but they needed to be said. Michael needed to hear them. He needed to understand what he was choosing. As I walked toward the door, I heard Margaret's voice behind me. No longer polite or condescending, but desperate. The lease is on our properties. You're not going to retaliate by raising the rent or terminating them, are you? I paused at the door. I'm a businesswoman, Margaret. I don't let personal feelings interfere with business. Your rent will stay the same, and your leases are secure as long as you pay on time. But don't mistake my professionalism for forgiveness. I'll never forget how you treated me tonight. David followed me out to my car. Not the old Honda Civic I'd driven here, but the Mercedes that had been waiting around the corner. As I got in, he shook his head with admiration. That was savage, Dorothy. Absolutely savage. I smiled thinly. They deserved every second of it. Did you see their faces when you mentioned the properties? He laughed. Richard looked like he was going to have a heart attack. And Margaret actually thought she could threaten your business relationships. These people have no idea who they're dealing with. I started the car but didn't drive away immediately. I sat there in the darkness, looking back at that mansion with all its lights blazing. Through the windows, I could see the family gathered in what looked like an emergency meeting. Hands waving, voices raised. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Mom, we need to talk. Can I come over tomorrow?" I typed back. "Of course, but come alone. This conversation is just between us." Another text came through, this time from Jessica. "Mrs. Patterson, please, I'm so sorry. I never meant to disrespect you. Can we start over?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Could we start over? Could I forget the way she'd told me to hide my humble circumstances? Could I forget that her first instinct had been embarrassment rather than pride in my accomplishments? Could I trust her with my son's heart when she'd been so willing to treat his mother like dirt? I didn't respond. Some questions don't have easy answers. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I thought about George. What would he have said about tonight? He would have laughed, I think. He would have loved the moment when Richard realized I was his landlord. But he also would have been sad. Sad that our son had chosen someone from a family that measured worth in such shallow ways. Sad that the values we'd tried to teach him, humility, respect, honest work, seemed to mean less to him than social status and appearances. When I got home, I walked through my modest house, the same house where Michael had grown up, where George and I had counted our earnings at the kitchen table, where we'd celebrated every small victory. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have marble floors or crystal chandeliers, but it was real. It was earned. It was mine. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch, looking at the stars. George used to say you could see more stars from our working-class neighborhood than from any mansion. Rich people had too many lights, too much noise. They'd forgotten how to see the simple, beautiful things. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Jessica. "My parents want to apologize. They say they were wrong about you. Please give them a chance to make this right." I could picture the scene. Margaret and Richard panicking about their leases, about their social standing, about what I might do. They weren't sorry about how they'd treated me. They were sorry they'd been caught. Sorry they'd misjudged someone with power over them. Sorry they'd handed a broom to their landlord. That wasn't remorse. That was fear. I thought about responding, about telling Jessica exactly what I thought of her parents' sudden change of heart. But I was tired. Tired of the games, tired of the pretense, tired of watching my son try to fit into a world that valued all the wrong things. Tomorrow would be soon enough for difficult conversations. Tomorrow, when Michael came over, I would ask him the question that mattered. Do you want to marry Jessica because you love who she is, or because you love what she represents? And I would know from his answer whether I'd raised him the way George and I intended. I finished my tea and went inside. In my bedroom, I took off the thrift store clothes and hung them carefully in the back of my closet. I might need them again someday. Not to test anyone else, but to remind myself where I came from. To remember the woman I used to be. The immigrant who'd been invisible to people like the Chens. That woman was still inside me. She always would be. And she was the source of my strength, my pride, my unshakable knowledge of my own worth. The night was over, but the real test was just beginning. Would Michael choose love or status? Would Jessica prove she was different from her family? And what exactly was I going to do with the power I held over the Chen family? The next 24 hours would answer all of those questions, and the answers would change everything. Michael arrived at my house at 10 the next morning. He looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes red and tired. I made him coffee the way he'd always liked it, strong, with just a splash of cream. And we sat at the kitchen table where I'd fed him breakfast for 18 years. He wrapped his hands around the mug like he needed something to hold on to. "Mom," he started, then stopped. I could see him struggling to find the words, to make sense of what had happened. I waited. After raising him for 35 years, I knew when to push and when to give him space. "I broke up with Jessica this morning," he finally said. The words hung in the air between us. I felt relief flood through me, but I kept my face neutral. "Tell me why." He needed to articulate this himself, to understand his own reasons. "Because I spent all night thinking about what you said. about values, about how they treated you when they thought you were poor. And I realized I've been making excuses for her for months. Every time she said something about the right kind of people or maintaining appearances, I told myself she was just nervous about fitting in. But that's who she is, Mom. That's who her whole family is. He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of George. I thought about you and Dad. How you worked 16 hours a day in that dry cleaning shop. How you never complained, never acted like honest work was beneath you. And then I thought about how Jessica reacted when I told her I wanted to do pro bono work for immigrants. She said it would look bad to the partners at the firm, that I should focus on prestigious clients. She was embarrassed that I wanted to help people like you and Dad used to be. What did she say when you broke up with her? I asked gently. Michael's laugh was bitter. She cried. She apologized. She said her parents had pressured her to say those things, that she didn't really believe them. But Mom, when I asked her directly if she was embarrassed by your background, she couldn't answer. She just kept saying, "It's complicated, and you don't understand social dynamics." As if treating people with basic respect was some kind of complicated social calculation. He shook his head. Dad would have been ashamed of me for even considering marrying into that family. I reached across the table and took his hand. Your father would have been proud that you figured it out, that you chose character over comfort. That took courage, Michael. He squeezed my hand. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I let you walk into that house knowing how they'd treat you. I should have defended you more strongly at dinner. I should have walked out the moment Jessica's mother handed you that broom. His voice cracked. I just sat there. I let them disrespect you because I was afraid of making a scene. You're human, I told him. And you were caught between your mother and the woman you thought you loved. But Michael, here's what I need you to understand. It's not about them disrespecting me. I've been disrespected before. I've survived much worse than a rich woman's condescension. What matters is that you saw the truth about who they are, about what they value, and you made the right choice. He nodded slowly, processing this. Jessica kept texting me all night. She wants to try again. She says she'll change, that she'll stand up to her parents. Can people like that really change? Michael asked, and I heard the hope in his voice, the part of him that still loved her, that wanted to believe redemption was possible. I thought carefully about my answer. People can change, but only if they want to. Only if they recognize that their behavior was fundamentally wrong, not just inconvenient or embarrassing. Jessica isn't sorry she hurt me. She's sorry she got caught. She's sorry her mother's landlord turned out to be the woman she told to hide her humble circumstances. That's not the same as genuine remorse. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Michael said something that surprised me. I called Grandma's CO this morning. My mother-in-law, George's mother, who was 93 and still sharp as a tack. What did she say? Michael smiled for the first time that morning. She laughed for about 5 minutes straight. Then she said, "Your mother is a tiger. She always was. Your father knew it, and now those rich fools know it too. Good. They needed to learn." I could hear my mother-in-law's voice in those words, her accent, her fierce pride. She also said something else, Michael continued. She said that when she and Grandpa first came to America, people treated them exactly like the Chens treated you last night, like they were invisible, like their work didn't matter, like they should be grateful for whatever scraps of respect rich Americans threw at them. She said the worst part wasn't being poor. It was being treated like being poor made you less human. His eyes were wet now. How did I forget that, Mom? How did I forget where we came from? Because success can make you forget, I said softly. You went to good schools, got a prestigious job, started moving in circles where everyone had money. It's easy to start thinking that's normal, that your background is something to overcome rather than something to be proud of. Jessica and her family represented a world that seemed glamorous, sophisticated. You're not the first person to be seduced by that, and you won't be the last. I poured him more coffee. The important thing is that you remembered, that when it counted, you knew what really mattered. My doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Margaret Chen standing on my porch, alone. She was dressed simply, for her, in slacks and a sweater, no jewelry except her wedding ring. She looked smaller somehow, less formidable than she had in her mansion. Michael tensed. What is she doing here? I stood up. Let me find out. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. We stood there on the threshold, and I saw her take in my modest home with new eyes. Not with contempt this time, but with something that might have been understanding. Dorothy, she began, and her voice was different too, less polished, more uncertain. May I speak with you? Just for a few minutes? I considered making her stand on the porch, making her feel as uncomfortable as she'd made me feel in her home. But I was tired of games. Come in. I led her to the living room, not the kitchen where Michael was. This conversation needed to happen without an audience. Margaret sat on the edge of my old sofa, the same sofa where George and I used to watch TV every evening. She looked at the family photos on the walls, at the modest furniture, at the life we'd built here. I came to apologize, she said, and I waited. Not because of the properties you own, or because you're my landlord. I came because I spent all night thinking about what you said, about how we treated you. And I realized, her voice broke slightly. I realized I've become exactly like the people who used to look down on me. I raised an eyebrow. You? She nodded. My family wasn't always wealthy. My grandfather worked in a textile factory. My father built the business from nothing. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I started believing that money made me better than other people. Last night, Margaret continued, after you left, my husband and I had the worst fight of our marriage. He said I'd embarrassed the family by handing you that broom. Not because it was cruel, but because you turned out to be wealthy. That's when I realized he still doesn't get it. He's not sorry we were rude. He's sorry we were rude to someone with power over us. She looked at me directly. But I'm sorry for the right reasons. I'm sorry because I treated a human being with contempt based on assumptions. I'm sorry because I taught my children that appearances matter more than character. And I'm sorry because I know exactly what it feels like to be invisible to people who think they're better than you. And I did it to you anyway. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But what I saw was genuine shame. Why did you forget, Margaret? If you knew what it felt like, why did you do it to someone else? She was quiet for a long moment. Because it's easier to be on top looking down than to remember being on the bottom looking up. Because surrounding myself with expensive things made me feel safe from ever being that poor girl again. Because I thought if I could make other people feel small, I would feel bigger. She wiped her eyes. That's not an excuse. That's just the truth. Your daughter called my son about 100 times last night, I said. She wants another chance. Margaret nodded. She's devastated. She really does love him. But she also needs to grow up. She needs to understand that loving someone means respecting where they come from, not being embarrassed by it. She paused. I told her this morning that if Michael agrees to see her again, it has to be on different terms. No more apologizing for your background. No more hiding you from our social circle. No more measuring people by their bank accounts. Do you think she can do that? I asked. Do you think any of you can really change? Margaret met my eyes. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Richard is still worried about appearances, about what people will think when this story gets out. Emma and James are young and shallow and might never learn. But Jessica? I think she's genuinely shocked by her own behavior. She watched the video her brother took at dinner. My stomach dropped. Video? Margaret nodded grimly. James recorded parts of the evening on his phone. He thought it would be funny to show his friends how awkward Michael's mother was. But when we watched it this morning, all we saw was our own cruelty. Every condescending smile, every subtle insult. It's horrifying to see yourself through someone else's eyes. Can I see it? I asked. Margaret pulled out her phone and handed it to me. I watched 2 minutes of footage that showed exactly what I'd experienced. But from an outside perspective, it was even worse. The way they'd all exchanged knowing looks when I used the wrong fork. The way Emma had rolled her eyes when I mentioned dry cleaning. The way Richard had literally patted my hand like I was a child when I'd asked a question about the wine. And then the moment Margaret handed me the broom, her voice so casually dismissive, "The kitchen's dirty, dear. Better get started." I handed the phone back. James thought this was funny? Margaret's face flushed with shame. He deleted it after we confronted him. He said he didn't realize how it looked. But the damage is done. We can all see now what you saw last night. We can all see who we've become. She stood up, preparing to leave. I don't expect forgiveness, Dorothy. I don't expect you to bless a relationship between Jessica and Michael. I just wanted you to know that at least one person in my family understands what we did wrong. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better. After Margaret left, Michael came into the living room. I heard some of that. What do you think? Is she for real? I sat down heavily. I think she's genuinely remorseful. I think seeing that video shocked her into recognizing her own behavior. But Michael, here's the hard truth. People usually revert to their default settings when the crisis passes. Right now, they're all scrambling because I have power over them. In 6 months, when things calm down, will they still respect people who serve them? Will they still treat the maid with dignity? I honestly don't know. So what should I do about Jessica? Michael asked. I thought about this carefully. That's your decision, son, not mine. But if you're asking my advice, I'd say this. If you want to give her another chance, make her earn it. Make her prove that she's changed. Have her volunteer at an immigrant services center. Have her work alongside people who clean offices and serve food and do the invisible work that keeps society running. See if she can look those people in the eye and treat them with the respect they deserve. If she can do that, genuinely, not as a performance, then maybe she's worth a second chance. Michael nodded slowly. That's fair. That's actually brilliant. He smiled at me. You know, I spent years trying to impress Jessica's family, trying to fit into their world. And all along, the most impressive person I knew was sitting in this kitchen, in this modest house, not needing anyone's approval. He hugged me tight. I'm sorry it took this for me to remember what Dad always said. Real wealth isn't what you have. It's who you are when no one's watching. Over the next few weeks, things unfolded in ways I hadn't expected. Jessica did start volunteering at an immigrant services center. At first, I was skeptical. Maybe she was just trying to prove something. But Michael told me she'd been going 3 times a week for a month, helping people navigate paperwork, teaching English, serving meals. One of the coordinators told him she'd seen Jessica cry while listening to a woman's story about crossing the border with her children. Real tears, not performative ones. Maybe people could change after all. Or maybe some people just needed to be shocked into remembering their humanity. Richard Chen, on the other hand, hadn't changed at all. I heard through my property manager that he'd tried to negotiate a lower rent, claiming that our personal conflict entitled him to some kind of discount. I had David send him a letter reminding him that business was business, and that trying to leverage a personal relationship to get financial benefits was exactly the kind of behavior that had caused our conflict in the first place. He paid his rent on time after that, but I knew he resented me. Some people never learn. Emma surprised me, though. She showed up at my house one afternoon, alone, without calling first. Mrs. Patterson, she said, standing nervously on my porch. I know I don't deserve your time, but I wanted to apologize in person. Not because my mom made me, but because I've been thinking about what I said to you, about your work being quaint and asking if you had to smell dirty clothes. It was cruel and ignorant, and I'm ashamed. She handed me a letter. I wrote this for you. You don't have to read it now or ever, but I needed to write it. I invited her in and read the letter while she waited. In it, she described how she'd started working part-time at a laundromat near her college to understand what her grandmother had gone through. Her grandmother, who'd also been an immigrant and had worked in service jobs. She wrote about meeting the women who worked there, hearing their stories, understanding their dignity and strength. They reminded me of you, she'd written. And I realized that when I mocked you, I was mocking every person who does honest work. I was mocking my own grandmother's memory. I'm so sorry. When I finished reading, Emma was crying. I don't know how to be better, she said. I grew up with so much privilege and I never questioned it. I never thought about the people who made my comfortable life possible. Your test, what you did at dinner, it woke me up. I'm grateful for it, even though it was humiliating. I handed her a tissue. Emma, the fact that you're here, that you're trying to understand, that matters. You're young. You have time to become the person you want to be. Don't waste it trying to impress people with money or status. Impress them with character. 3 months after that dinner, Michael and Jessica got back together. But it was different this time. She came to my house regularly, not as a duty, but because she wanted to know me. She asked about my life, about George, about building the business. She listened to stories about discrimination and hardship without trying to change the subject. She even helped me at one of my dry cleaning locations for a week, learning the machines, interacting with customers, understanding the work. I watched her carefully, looking for signs of pretense, but what I saw was genuine transformation, or at least the beginning of it. They got married a year later. It was a small ceremony, nothing like the elaborate wedding the Chens had originally planned. They got married in my backyard, under the same tree where George and I used to drink coffee every morning. Jessica's family came, and I watched Margaret actively include my neighbors in conversations, watched her compliment Aurora's homemade cake, watched her thank the servers by name. Richard was stiff and uncomfortable, but at least he was trying. Emma gave a speech about second chances and growth that made half the guests cry. Even James managed to behave himself, though I caught him checking his phone during the vows. The greatest moment came when Michael gave his speech. He talked about his father and me, about the sacrifices we'd made, about the values we'd taught him. My mom once told me that real wealth isn't what you have. It's who you are when no one's watching, he said, looking directly at me. She tested my fiancé's family, and they failed spectacularly. But then she gave them something more valuable than money. She gave them a chance to learn, to grow, to become better people. Not everyone took that chance, but the ones who did, he looked at Jessica, at Margaret, at Emma. They're richer for it. As I watched my son marry the woman he loved, I thought about that night at the Chen mansion, about the broom Margaret had handed me, about the assumptions they'd all made, about the test they'd failed so completely. It would have been easy to hold a grudge, to use my power as their landlord to make their lives difficult, to exclude them from my son's life out of spite. But George had taught me that bitterness was a luxury poor people couldn't afford, and rich people didn't need. Forgiveness was harder than revenge, but it was also more powerful. After the ceremony, Margaret approached me. We stood together watching the young people dance, my modest backyard transformed by simple decorations and string lights. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on us, for giving Jessica a chance to prove she could change." I looked at her. "I didn't do it for you, Margaret. I did it for my son. He loves her, and she's genuinely trying to be worthy of that love. That's all any parent can ask for." Margaret nodded. "My grandson, when they have children, he'll know both sides of his heritage, the struggle and the success, the poverty and the wealth. Because of you, he'll understand that it all matters, that it all shapes who we are." That night, after everyone had gone home and the backyard was quiet again, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. Michael and Jessica had left for their honeymoon, off to build a life together on a foundation we'd almost lost. I thought about the woman I'd been when I first came to America. Scared, poor, invisible to so many people. I thought about George and how we'd built something real together through work and sacrifice and love. I thought about the test I'd given the Chen family, and how it had revealed not just their character, but given some of them a chance to choose who they wanted to be. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael, already at the airport. "Thank you for everything, Mom. For testing them. For teaching me. For reminding me what really matters. Dad would be proud of us both. I love you." I smiled and typed back. "I love you too, son. Build a good life. Build a kind life. That's the real inheritance I'm leaving you." I thought about the $8 million I had in the bank, the properties I owned, the empire George and I had built. It was substantial. It was security. But it wasn't the real wealth I was passing down to my son. The real wealth was knowing your worth regardless of what you owned. The real wealth was treating every person with dignity, whether they served you or employed you. The real wealth was understanding that honest work was never shameful, that struggle could forge character, and that the greatest measure of a person wasn't their bank account. It was how they treated someone who couldn't do anything for them. That was the inheritance that really mattered. That was what George and I had built together, and what I'd almost watched my son lose. I finished my tea and went inside, turning off the lights one by one. Tomorrow I'd go back to managing my properties, to running my business, to living my quiet, modest life. The Chens would pay their rent. Jessica and Michael would build their marriage. Emma would continue her journey toward becoming a better person. Richard would probably never really change, but at least he'd learn to hide his contempt better. And Margaret would keep trying, keep growing, keep remembering where she came from. That would have to be enough. As I lay in bed that night, in the same room I'd shared with George for 40 years, I felt him next to me like I sometimes did. We did good, didn't we? I whispered to the darkness. And I swear I heard his voice whisper back. We did perfect, my love. We raised a good man. We taught him what matters. We showed them all that real wealth can't be bought or sold. It can only be built, one honest day at a time. I smiled and closed my eyes. The test was over. The lesson was learned. Justice had arrived, not as revenge, but as transformation. And that was the sweetest victory of all. That's my story. What do you think? Would you have done the same thing I did? Would you have exposed them, or would you have just walked away? Leave me a comment telling me what you would have chosen. And if this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I have so many more stories like this to share with you. Stories about life, about justice, about the moments that change everything. Thank you for listening. Until next time.